Hello everybody and welcome to today's video and live chat. And today it's all about one of my favourite lost palaces, and that's Greenwich Palace. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the history of the palace. We're going to be talking about its layout, how it was used, some of the historic events that took place there. And I'm going to give you one or two top tips that I have for making sure you visit, for those of you who are planning a visit. Okay, so first of all, for those of you who don't know me and might be new here, my name's Sarah and I'm the founder of the Tudor Travel Guide, your visitor's companion to the houses, castles and manors of the 16th century. So I can see that people are already joining, so if you're joining the chat, as ever, make sure you give me a thumbs up and even better, a wow, to tell me that you can hear me okay and everything is looking good at your end. Hello. So yeah, make sure, let me know if there's any problems with the audio or video and that needs sorting. So as a few people join, I can see Nina is here. Hello, Nina. For those of you who are new to the live chat here, do say hello in the chat box. Let me know where you are in the world. That would be lovely too. And also, if you have ever been to Greenwich Palace, that would be great too. So, hi Cindy, great. I can see you've joined, and Susan as well. Hello there, guys. That's lovely to see you. So if you haven't joined, or if you haven't yet been to Greenwich Palace, maybe it is on your itinerary, and again you might want to let me know. And while you're listening to this chat, if you can think of anybody else who might like to hear the video, then make sure you tag them. So we've just got a couple of so here's Nalaine, is that right, Nalaine? Hello from Mount Dora in Florida. How's Florida today? Is it nice and warm and sunny? It's certainly been a hot day here in the UK. Okay, and who else have we got here? There we go. Catherine, hi, hello. Nice to see you again from over there in Vancouver in Canada. So it's lovely for you to join me. Okay, well, I think we should just dive on in, and I'm going to just talk a little bit, first of all, about the history of Greenwich Palace. Now, interestingly, Greenwich wasn't always called Greenwich. So in its first iteration, around the 1440s, it was built by this man here. So if I can just bring that up for you. Okay, here we have Duke Humphrey of Gloucester, who was a rather well-connected man, very powerful, very wealthy. He was the brother of Henry V and uncle to the young, eventually, Henry VI. And he founded a manor at Greenwich, and he called it Bella Court. So unfortunately for Duke Humphrey of Gloucester, at some point he fell from favour and ended up in the Tower. I mean, who didn't? And I think he died under mysterious circumstances. What happened was the manor house, the fine manor house that he had built, got passed on to Margaret of Anjou by Henry VI. And she decided she wanted to renovate the place, so she basically refurbished it, improved it, enlarged it, and created a manor which she called the Manor of Plaisance, which, you know, sort of says a lot about how pleasant the environment was there. Of course, the palace being surrounded by lovely deer park, much as it is today. It's still surrounded by park, and there are still, hello Monica, I see you there. There are still thought to be deer in the park that actually have a lineage back into the 16th century and into the Tudors. So anyway, the Tudors come along, and Henry VII is rather taken also by Greenwich Palace. And again, he adds his own stamp. He basically builds this magnificent red bricked palace on the bank, by the bank of the Thames. And during the course of that early Tudor period, it becomes known as Greenwich Palace rather than the Palace of Plaisance. So now I don't know. I've got this wonderful, I don't know whether you can see that, but this is a reconstruction done by the wonderful artist Peter Kent of how Tudor Greenwich looked. Hello, Gillian from Milton Keynes. Lovely to see you here. So here we have the Tudor Palace at its zenith. It's quite a small drawing. I don't know whether you can enlarge it and see for yourself, but I just want to talk to you a little bit about how Greenwich was arranged. So if you can see that there was basically, it was a courtyard house, which of course was quite typical for the period. The main ranges of Greenwich Palace were built around this central courtyard, which you can probably just make out in the drawing. There is a fountain at the centre. Now, the way Greenwich was arranged, and which was typical of any royal palace, was that there was a king and a queen's side. So the king's side was fronting the river. So if you can see, there's a lovely range there, and with a large tower or donjon, and that actually contained Henry's privy chambers. So we had things like his study and his library there in that donjon. And like typical of any royal apartments, there was the progression from the right hand side of your picture, from Henry's most private apartments. So his raying chamber, also raying chamber, if you're not aware, is like the equivalent of a dressing room. His bed chamber, and then of course you would have had his privy chamber, and moving progressively into the public chambers along to the right hand side of the screen there, you would have had the presence chamber, and then at the far right hand side of the picture, the chapel royal. Now, directly across the courtyard there was the Queen's apartments. So this, of course, was the likes of where Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, etc., would have had their lodgings while they were at Greenwich Palace. So what of the other two ranges? Well, the range that connects the two over on your right-hand side was a gallery. So it was a private gallery. And that allowed the king and the queen's chambers to be connected directly in private without the monarch having to go through the public chambers of the palace, which were in the range opposite. So, of course, if there were any conjugal visits, he could do so without being seen by the rest of the court. Now, unfortunately, we don't completely know the arrangements of the rooms in that particular range. Greenwich, as I'll come to talk about, was destroyed in the 17th century, and there are no contemporary floor plans. I believe these reconstructions have been pieced together probably by documentation, etc. And there's been some excavation at Greenwich in recent times, particularly involving the chapel. But it is thought that in that range that I was talking about, that gallery range, was the bedchamber of Anne Boleyn, for example. Now, the other one that opposes that, so that's the opposite side of that central courtyard on the left, what contained the King's and Queen's Great Watching Chamber and also the Great Hall. So a very typical arrangement of the period. So I'm just going to have a look. I'm just going to have a look at what a couple of people have been saying. Am I making any sense here? I hope so. So Amanda was saying, no, never been to Greenwich Palace one day. Well, I hope so, Amanda. It's wonderful. And Louise, there we go. Louise is saying to us, I live in walking distance of Greenwich, but need to know more about the old palace. Well, as I'm talking, feel free to just drop any of the questions that you might have or the comments in the comments. And if I can answer them, then I surely will. But one of the most interesting things to me about any Tudor place is not just the structure and the layout, but of course placing events in the places they happen. Because I don't know about you, but when I can imagine a place, then I can start to imagine events happening, and it kind of comes alive in my imagination more. So I first learnt about Greenwich Palace when I was writing my novel about Anne, Le Temps Viendra, a novel of Anne Boleyn, and I really wanted to understand how the palace was connected. And of course, some major events took place in relation to Anne. So while we're talking about major events, let's think about those. Well, of course, Greenwich Palace was the birthplace of both Henry VIII and Mary I, and of course Elizabeth I. So 3 really important events in their own right. And of course, those children would have been delivered in the Queen's lodgings that I have just been describing to you. And then, of course, I was talking about Anne Boleyn. Well, a lot happened to Anne Boleyn at Greenwich, as we know. It's the last day of the month of May, so it's very appropriate to be talking about this. So Anne, other than, of course, giving birth to Elizabeth at Greenwich, she set off on her coronation pageant from Greenwich. So she would have processed to the water steps, taken into her barge, and a huge flotilla of barges headed downstream, or should I say upstream, towards the Tower of London. And I think I'm losing people. Oh, I've got some more comments there. Okay, your subtitles are hysterical. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I think that must be just due to the software. Of course, Anne Boleyn was also arrested at Greenwich Palace, and you might be able to see from this diagram up in the top left-hand corner, you have the tilt yard, and overlooking the tilt yard, you have these 2 large towers, and they were the tilt yard towers. And of course, those towers were they were built on multi-stories. They were quite high, usually with octagonal turrets at the corners, and this was the case in Greenwich, with lots of windows. So essentially they were meant for people to be able to view not only the tilt yard and what was going on in the jousting, but more specifically to have fantastic views of the park, because as you can see, there's a wonderful parkland behind Greenwich there. So, of course, it was the May Day joust in May 1536 in that very tilt yard that Henry VIII stormed off, having received a note, and Anne must have been left surely wondering what on earth was going on. She would later, of course, be arrested the following day. She dined in her presence chamber at Greenwich, before eventually being escorted to her barge to be taken to the Tower. So under very, very different circumstances, she certainly knew both a triumph and tragedy at Greenwich. Happier times, though, in the chapel. So if you remember, in the lodgings, which fronts directly onto the Thames, to the very left-hand side of the lodgings, there is the chapel. Now, I'm just seeing Jenny's comment. Is it possible to see the diagram of the palace enlarged anywhere? Well, hold on, and I'll come back to that, because I'm doing a very special virtual tour of Greenwich when you will see it in a much larger scale. I know it's quite small as it is. So anyway, in the chapel, Henry VIII married Catherine of Aragon, and then later Anne of Cleves. So we have 2 royal marriages, and in the very same chapel, of course, Anne Boleyn was first presented as queen at Easter in 1533. So a hugely historic place, and you may or may not be aware that they actually did some excavations, and I mentioned this a little while ago, at Greenwich. I think it was in the 70s, I think, but they unearthed the original tiled floor that was the surface of the altar, basically, and this lovely geometric tiled design, which was absolutely original to the Henrician palace. It was preserved, as archaeologists do, by leaving it in the ground. I think it was covered and it's left there, and it's still there today. So I've got a question from Cindy. Would Elizabeth have been there when her mother was arrested? I can't quite remember. I know when I wrote Le Temps Viendra, I tried very much to base it in fact, and I did have Elizabeth there at Greenwich. I guess it's possible. We do know, of course, that Anne was a doting mother, and she loved to be around Elizabeth, although of course by this time Elizabeth had been given her own household and was moving around from place to place, Hatfield and Eltham, etc. It's possible, I guess. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. So Greenwich Palace, what happened to it? Well, it really reached its zenith in the reign of Henry VIII. He loved Greenwich. Christmas was often held at Greenwich. But as Henry's reign moved on, he started to prefer the palaces of Whitehall and Hampton Court and Windsor. So the whole court moved westward over time. And Greenwich was used slightly less by Henry later on in his reign. But however, of course, it was used by all Tudor monarchs, but it really the end of Greenwich came, as was the case with many of these wonderful palaces and great Tudor houses during the English Civil War in the first half of the 17th century. Parliament didn't want to upkeep these hugely expensive buildings. The monarchy had been overthrown. There was no one there to care for them. And quite rapidly, these kind of buildings just fell into disrepair. Now, apparently, during the Restoration, Charles II planned to build a new palace on the site of the old Tudor palace. So he commanded that the old Tudor palace, what was left of it, be completely demolished. He intended to build, as I say, a brand sparkling new palace in its place. But only a very small fraction of that was ever constructed. And so essentially, Charles II was the guy who signalled the final end of Greenwich. And today it is completely lost. All that we have of the palace is underground. However, and so this is my thinking about visiting. I really love the vibe at Greenwich, and of course because it's such an important historical site, and I'll just get rid of this for a second. Because it's such an important historical site, and I really recommend visiting it. There is a beautiful park, as I said, surrounding Greenwich, and you can there's a lovely plaque on the ground that tells you, of course, that Henry and Elizabeth were born there. And if you have any idea, and potentially you might want to take my In the Footsteps books along with you, which describes again some of these buildings and how they were arranged, you can walk in the footsteps of the palace and imagine yourself walking along by the Thames within the sort of the King's lodging range, and walk over to where at the back of the palace you have to cross a road, and then you at the other side of the road you would be in where the old Tudor gardens would have been, and over to your left would be the old Tiltyard Towers, the banqueting hall. And today there is a car park. Car parks seem to figure strongly in history. There is a car park where the old Tiltyard once was. And I did go over there and just stand in the car park. So if anybody had been watching that, they must have thought I'd gone crazy. But it was very moving to stand there and know that that place was Anne Boleyn's last taste of freedom. And while you're at Greenwich, of course, make sure you do walk up the hill towards the observatory. At the top of the hill, where the observatory is, used to be a building called Duke Humphrey's Tower, obviously in honour of the chap who first built Bella Court, as we were saying. Now, I don't know if this is true, but gossip has it that once upon a time in Henry VIII's day, he used to keep his fine wine and mistresses in the tower, and that included Mary Carey. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. It makes for good gossip. If you ever find any definitive proof of that, do let me know. But again, you can sit up on the tower overlooking the site of Greenwich, and you can imagine the royal court coming out through the back gate and hurtling up the hill. It must have been quite a sight. While you're in the area, of course, they're not far away from Greenwich is also Eltham Palace. So if you are making the journey to go to Greenwich, then I urge you to try and include Eltham Palace. Now, I've just recently done an A to Z of Tudor places over on my YouTube channel on Eltham Palace. So if you were to hop over to YouTube and type in the Tudor Travel Guide and Eltham Palace, if you haven't seen it, then you can get a feel for the history of Eltham Palace. But that, in short, was a very, very popular medieval palace with the Yorkist kings and became used as a Tudor royal nursery. It was the place where Henry VIII greeted Erasmus when he was brought to visit the young Prince Henry by Thomas More. A lot of that palace is gone, but the Great Hall still stands, and you can still see the imprint of where the royal lodgings were. So they're a great little combo to put together if you are in the area. Now, I think one of my most top tips about visiting Greenwich, if you can, because most people I know when they come over, they stay in London, is do not take the tube to Greenwich. Do get on one of the river cruisers that goes up the Thames. You can hop on at Westminster or the Tower of London, take the river cruiser up to Greenwich. First of all, it's absolutely wonderful out on the river if it's a hot day because you've got the wonderful river breeze. Secondly, you get to see some amazing sights of London that you just do not see if you're going on the tube, or even if you're going in the car. Thirdly, of course, this is how the Tudors got up and down and moved between the palaces. So you really do feel that, again, you can be in the footsteps of the Tudors. And if you do take that river trip, there are different types of boats. One's like a city, I think it's called a city cruiser. It's kind of the fast taxi. Try and hop on something that's going to go at a little more sedate pace. There's a lovely tourist boat where you can get the patter from the captain of the ship, who will tell you all these wonderful facts about the different places as you pass them. So I think that would absolutely have to be my top tip for that. Okay, so let's just have a quick look. What are you saying? So Sonia's saying, I park in that car park often. I had no idea I was in the tilt yard. Well, that's amazing, Sonia. So next time you go, just take a breath and think about what was going on there. Let's see, Louise, that's interesting. I've not visited Hatfield yet, but there is one in Greenwich. It's protected by a gate fence. I wonder about it, whether it's just something that's actually true. Okay, was that the tower that we were talking about? Good. Okay, so how true is it that Elizabeth picnicked or sat frequently under the Elizabeth oak tree in Greenwich Park? Well, I know there's the oak tree at Hatfield. I wonder if that's what you mean, Louise. It might be. And anyway, it's, it's certain, the parks were used all the time. The Tudors lived an outdoor life. They didn't stay inside cooped up. So I'm sure they made the most of that outdoor time. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. Okay, so I think that's the oak tree. Okay, so I think that's probably all from me, unless there's any other questions. All I just wanted to say before you go, because what I'm trying to do with these chats is to do them once a week on a Saturday at 5 p.m. However, once a month, I will be streaming directly into YouTube because I'm doing something slightly different. There'll be a new YouTube once a month live chat with a guest. And my first one of those will be next week. So that's Saturday, the 6th of June at 5 p.m. I'll be streaming live to YouTube. And I have as a guest Professor Glenn Richardson, who is an expert on Renaissance monarchy. And of course, if you hadn't noticed, the 7th of June is the 500th anniversary of the start of the Field of Cloth of Gold. And Glenn has written extensively on that subject. And so I'm going to be in conversation with him. I will have questions to ask him, but actually it's all about you guys. So if you have questions about the Field of Cloth of Gold, anything at all, Glenn is absolutely your man. And so the best course of action is, if you're not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, then I would head over to YouTube and type in the Tudor Travel Guide. Make sure that you subscribe. And it's also useful, of course, if you're not already, to be subscribed to my blog, because I always send out details of things that are coming up at the weekend, usually midweek, in my newsletter. And so if you need the address of the blog, if you're not aware of it, here it is up on the screen now. It's thetudortravelguide.com. Okay, so there's a couple of things for you to be doing. Oh gosh, special announcement. The special announcement will be made. So thank you, Stephanie, for reminding me. The special announcement will absolutely be made next Saturday on that very YouTube live stream. So this is really for people who missed out on my virtual summit, my Field of Cloth of Gold 500 virtual summit, who missed out signing up for it. I will be making it available again for a short period of time, but you need to tune in to find out how you get access to that. So make sure, if you missed it, there are, 7 amazing videos, 8 speakers covering a whole range of topics about the Field of Cloth of Gold, from food to dress to the political, the social context, etc. There's loads to get your teeth into. So make sure you sign up. Okay, so thank you very much, Sherry, who says, thank you, really appreciate these chats. Well, that's very kind of you. I hope so. And of course, continue to leave your comments in the comment box below, letting me know if these chats are working for you, or topics that you might want to cover, or any questions that you might have, and I will do my best in future chats to do so. Okay, I think I might have gone on too long, but it has been wonderful to see you all here, and hopefully I'll see you with Glenn over on YouTube next Saturday at 5 p.m. British summertime. Okay guys, have a lovely day, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. All right, lots of Tudor love. Bye.